All right, we are live. Welcome to Full Stack. My name is Gio, and well, it's Jeffrey, but you can call me Gio. And I'm your host for Full Stack here. We are still trying out this online thing in the new world of 2021. Welcome to 2021, first Full Stack of 2021. That's cool. We are still trying the live online thing, and we cannot wait to be able to meet with you guys in person again. I know that we skipped December. Even online, we just thought, well, the way it landed around Christmas and holiday stuff, it was a little too crazy. So we decided to skip December. But we're glad to be back in January. And hopefully at some point this year, we can be back in person for those of you who live here locally in Carlsbad and the San Diego area. And then, of course, if you're watching online and you're far away, then we'll continue to stream them. And you can still watch them online afterwards as well as we upload them. But regardless, I'm glad you're here today. Today's guest, I'm going to bring him on here. We got Travis Arnold.
Hey, how's it
he
going?
works with me at Planning Center. And if you guys remember last month, we had a developer panel, and Leanne on the developer panel is Travis's wife.
Yep.
So we got the, I guess, do you have any other relatives who code or program? Maybe we can have them on next month.
No, yeah, that's it. Everyone else is scared of computers.
Oh man, I can't imagine the tech support for your family and Christmas and holidays.
Oh, it's bad. This coronavirus kind of worked out, I guess, this year of not being able to see family. So, or over the phone tech support.
Oh man, your tech support contract, yes, over the phone. Crazy. Well, I'm glad you're here tonight. We've had multiple conversations over the past years. Travis has been on and done a few talks before at Full Stack, which have always been well received, and he does a great job in presenting JavaScript stuff. I asked him if he would do another talk for us because he was posting a lot of stuff on Twitter, and he's always okay. I'm gonna say this, Travis, you're like the nerdiest designer I've ever known, and I mean that in the largest compliment I can. Because man, you're always like tinkering. You're like a scientist. You're in there trying to figure out what's going on, and you're not just like putting pixels on the screen. You're really understanding why they're there, how they get there, how they went from your editor to the screen. And then even beyond that, people who may not be able to see like we see or hear like we hear, making sure everything's accessible. And I really appreciate that about you. You really take the extra time to understand those things and really build things for everyone. So kudos to you on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So anyway, all that said, he's got something on Babel today that is, it blew my mind. I thought it's really cool. So I'm going to let you kind of describe a little bit about what you're going to say. And then you recorded a pre-recorded video, and we're going to play that to do the talk. So we don't have to do it live. So you can get what you want to get said well, and within a time frame, which is perfect. But I will say before we go to that, if you have any comments or questions, we are monitoring YouTube chat. So if you have anything you want to ask Travis during the talk, put those in the chat. And after the talk, we'll have a live Q&A. After his presentation, we'll have a live Q&A, and we'll answer those as they come up. But yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk about here?
Yeah. So just kind of a simple introduction into Babel. Coming from a design background, I was always very scared of things like Babel. It seemed like a lot of magic under the hood. And once you start to dig into these things, like I think like anything else, you realize that it's not magic. So just kind of want to give an overview of like if you have a JavaScript background that you can write Babel plugins, and they are extremely powerful. We use them, for instance, at Planning Center. So I run a React UI kit, and we were able to ship code mods and that's just written with JavaScript and Babel, and allows us to upgrade our code bases and move things forward, which is really nice. So just have to give you like a peek into that world and how you can even use it in a design sense.
What's give me the 2-sentence definition of a code mod. What's a code mod? What does it do?
Making the computer rewrite your code for you.
Perfect. Love it. If I could do that all day, it'd be awesome.
Yeah, let's just be dumb, right? Like let the computer do all the smart stuff.
Yeah. It'd be awesome. All right, cool. What do you have anything else you want to introduce the video with, or do you want to just go ahead and roll right into it?
No, I think we can jump in, and then if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask.
Yeah, definitely. All right, cool. We're gonna roll this video, and we'll be back after that. See you guys soon.
Awesome.
Bye.
Hey everyone, my name is Travis and I'm a designer and developer. And today I want to talk to you about using Babel to statically analyze JSX. It's a bit of a mouthful, so let's get into some terminology here before we get started. First off, what is Babel? Babel is a source-to-source compiler, or also known as a transpiler, and it takes things like JSX and can output them to ES5 function calls. So if you've never heard of JSX, it's basically a sugar that we get to write for things like React, Preact, and some other libraries. And then they will output to function calls so they can be ran in a browser environment. So Babel does this by doing what's called an AST transformation. And so it first goes through a tokenization process. This is similar to how other compilers work. And it will spit out a bunch of information about our code. So AST stands for abstract syntax tree. And this is a bit of a computer sciencey term, but don't be too afraid. Basically, it just means, we have a ton of information about our code at hand, and now we can do things with that. With all that knowledge of our code. What you see here is called AST Explorer, and this is one of the more popular tools to work with ASTs. So it doesn't only work with Babel, it works with a lot of other compilers, which is really great. And so it's got a really nice interactive interface to work with when trying to dissect these things. The way Babel does its AST transformations is from a depth-first search. And so the way this works is, if you can imagine, if you have all of our nodes, we'll go to the very deepest part first. And so in this case, we'd start with A, go to D, F, and then up to C, back down to E, and then finally over to B. This will come in handy a little bit later when we start to write our plugin. So this just kind of give you a visualization of how it's working. So what is static analysis? We know what Babel is now, so how does static analysis play a role into this? Well, there's some tools on the market similar to Babel. One called eslint is a very popular one. And so this allows us to set up rules for our code. And it's a form of static analysis. We're not running any of this code when we get these errors. So eslint is responsible for linting our code and providing errors that we want. So in this case, we have an accessibility plugin running that will tell us to wrap our emoji with an image, or with a span, with a rule of image, and then having a label associated with that so it's accessible. And so what's great about this is that we don't ever have to run our code. We know that there's an error before we even get to the browser, or before we even build our code, which is wonderful. So eslint does a great job at this. They have a ton of plugins. Highly recommend it if you've never heard of it. Then moving on, there's another tool called TypeScript that's become very popular more recently in the JavaScript community. And TypeScript allows us, similar to eslint, to set up this contract with our code. It does a lot more than eslint, and at a basic level, we can see that setting up something like a title for a button, if we don't pass that, and we said that we want to pass it, our compiler will yell at us. And so before we even compile it, or it won't compile in this case, because we're saying that there's an error here. And then more advanced, say, code editors like VS Code have tighter integrations with things like TypeScript, where you don't even have to compile your code. And if you have type information, I can give these to you for free. So this is where static analysis comes into play, and it can be very helpful especially for a large code base. So now we're ready to build our plugin now that we have a little bit of terminology down.
All right, I'm going to pause real quick.
And today, we're going to be building.
We're trying this new technology. It's the audio is pausing a little bit on my end, so I'm going to see if I restart this, if it plays a little bit better. So, sorry if that was annoying, but let's try this. Let's see if we can get it going again.
A little bit of terminology down. And today, we're going to be building a layers panel of sorts. So you can think of this like, I originally built this for a design tool, but yeah, I don't know, you could probably use it for some other applications. And so essentially we'll be able to tell where all of the blocks of code are in our JSX file, as well as how many of them there are, and how they are nested and related to each other. So let's dive in and get started. All right, so now we're ready to start coding our plugin. I set up this file here so it's got most of things fleshed out so we can just focus on our plugin. But just to kind of give you an overview, we have React Live set up. So this is an editor, a text editor that's kind of showing, you can see the code here on the right-hand side. Yeah, and just some basic things like the on mouse enter to highlight things once we get those that information from our Babel plugin. Yeah, and just kind of like a basic React app setup here. So let's dive in and just start writing some code. So first things first, Babel expects a function for a plugin, and so we're going to export a default function here. And then we need to return an object. There's what's called a visitor pattern. And this visitor pattern, we'll get back to in a second. But first, we need to do something else so we can actually write JSX. So we're going to import a JSX plugin. And I already have that installed here. So this is a syntax plugin. And this is kind of required for Babel to understand our JSX. So we're feeding it some JSX. And this syntax plugin will enable us to actually read things off of that. And so coming back to this visitor pattern, we can actually visit every part of our program. So as we traverse down, if you remember maybe back the AST Explorer that I showed, this is where this will come in handy because we can go to see like what can we visit different parts of our code. And so the first thing we want to visit in our case is our program. So program's kind of like the first thing that we're going to get into when we feed our string of text to it. So as we enter our program, we want to store some state in our case. And so, I'm sorry, state. We want to call this tree. So in our case, we're going to call this tree. And tree will be responsible for storing all the elements as we go through each element in our. And next, we will want to visit every JSX element. So that's kind of what we can do here. So this is going to get called for every JSX element. So we get back what's called a path in each part of the tree that we visit. And this path has all that information that we could see from AST on it. Babel has a specific thing called path. What you'll see in like AST Explorer is a node, but we can access that node within the path. So path just has like a ton of ways to talk to siblings or parents and things like that. In our case, we just want the node. So we'll console log this out. We're probably not going to be able to see anything. Let's see here. We pull up our console. We can clean this out. We actually need to get this to run. And so this isn't running yet. So we have this parse code function here. We have our plugin that's being imported. So how do we actually parse that code? Let's do that now. So we're using this Babel standalone transform, and this just allows us to run Babel in a runtime environment like we are right now. So this is how like Babel runs the demo site on there, like the try it out if you go to the Babel website. And we can take our code string here. So we get a code string back in our parse code function. And the second argument to transform is options. And we will get we want to pass our plugin here. And plugins takes an array of plugins. And so we can pass our plugin there. And now we actually need to use our parse code function. If we come down here, we will create a use effect. And now every time our code string changes, we want to do something with that. And so this is where we'll actually parse our code. So we'll say code string and use effect runs on the first initialization of your app. So once app mounts, use effect will run with this code string. So that should be good enough for now to at least get things running. And there we go. Now we can see everything popping down here. So we have all these nodes, we have all this information coming in. So similar to the AST Explorer we saw before, if we come back over here to our plugin, we get all these paths and path.node. So this is great. This is kind of what we're looking for. Now we want to start storing this information. So we can take our tree, start to push these elements into it. So we want to take our name, take the name. And so the way we can get the name is if we look in here and we dig down into the node. So we have a bunch of information about our JSX element, and we can get the name off of the opening element. And so we dig down in here, it's name. So then we finally get figure there that you can see. So we'll do path.node opening element name. That should give us what we need. While we're in here, we also want to get the start and end of the position of our JSX element. So if we can see that here. So there's an end, and then the start is down here below. You can get that information off of things like the opening element as well, but we want the whole block of. So that's why we're going to get it off of top level part of. And so do that, and this should give us a pretty good idea of all the JSX elements that we have in our file. So come back over to our app of our transform that we're parsing our string. So we're not actually doing anything with this now. So like, how do we get this information out of Babel? I think there might be a couple different ways you can do this. I personally like to do it, I think, the Babel way, and that would be passing an option. And so the way we pass an option is through a tuple, essentially, which will pass our plugin as the first argument, and then the second argument are options that we want to pass in. So in this case, we're going to call this onTreeReady, which will be a callback. I like to get a little fancy here. I know we can just do like a callback, but I love promises now that we've been using promises more in like new JavaScript. I think it makes things a little bit cleaner to work with. So in that case, I want to use a promise here. And so our promise will take a resolve property or function. And so we're going to pass that as an option into our Babel plugin. And so this is our onTreeReady that we have here. And so now our parse code will return a promise. And once that promise resolves, it will resolve with this onTreeReady callback. So if we go down in our parse code function here, we take a string and we will return a promise now. And we want to get back a tree. And so since we already have tree up to the top, we'll call this next tree. You can just console log this for now. We don't want to set it yet. Not yet. Make sure everything's working. And so this isn't working yet. So how do we hook up these options that we're passing in now? Let's go back over to our plugin. So a really cool way that Babel works is as we traverse our tree. So imagine that graph I showed a little bit earlier. So we go in and out that depth first. Babel gives us a way to essentially a callback for each of those things. So we can change some things here for our program. And so now our program can actually take an object as well. Yeah, we can just delete this. And it takes an enter exit function. And so this works for any node that we're entering or exiting. And so as before, we have our tree with an empty array. So that's how we initialize once we like enter our program. And then as we exit, we want to use that option and call the tree with those custom options. And so the first argument in here is a path. And so we don't want to deal with that really. And the next one is called state. And state is where options are held. There's some other information that comes in with state, but we're only really worried about options right now. It's called ops. And we can access that callback function that we declared in our plugin when we passed it in. So now we can take this onTreeReady and pass our tree. So you can imagine we enter our program, we start this initialization, we go through every JSX element, push all of these through into our tree, and then once we exit our program at the end, we want to have a callback. So we're passing an option in here, and that callback gets this tree that we've been stuffing all these JSX elements in. And so we did everything correctly. We should be able to see here. Now we can see at the bottom. There, that's perfect. That's kind of what we wanted to start to build our layers panel up. So this is some very simple information. So let's see if we can get this output to the screen now. So we should be able to set our tree. And see if that works. Great. Awesome. So now we're pretty much done. That was maybe not the hard part. We'll see what the hard part is here in a second. So this is great. We actually have all the information, most of the information at least that we need. The only problem is that this is a flat structure. So there's no information about the hierarchy of our code. So we can see that there's a figure here with an image nested in it and then a div nested in that, or nested next to that as a sibling with block quotes and paragraphs and all this. So like, how do we know that information of how these things relate to one another? I was scratching my head on this when I first did this. There's a tool I highly recommend checking out. It's called Blocks UI. It's essentially a JSX design tool. And they do a layers panel in a sense. So I peeked over on their code just to figure out how they did this, and very clever on the way that they figured this out. So similarly to how we did the enter and exit in our program, we can do this with our JSX element. So I'm just going to do this, and we'll hold on to that. And so we're going to do enter. And so when we enter our JSX element, we want to push to this, to the tree like we were before. But now when we exit, so remember the graph that we showed, the depth first, we can pop off the last child. So we can say, we'll call this child. We'll say tree, call pop on it since we have an array. This will grab the last element in the array. So as we're exiting, we can take this child, and then we can also take the parent. So we know that the next item before that is the parent. So we say this dot tree, and then we take the tree length, and then -1. So this will get the last element. Now we have a parent. Now we can start to store this information. So we'll need to add a little bit more information here in our array. So we're going to call this children, and this will be an empty array initially. And then as we go through, now that we have this parent here, we can take the children of the parent, push the child to that. So we take that child off, and then we push it down into the parent's children. And before our program actually runs, since we won't have anything in here, we do need to check for the length of our tree just to make sure, or else it would error. And so we just need to make sure there's at least one item in here before we pop the child off and check for children. So this should give us an updated structure of our code. And so, yeah, we can kind of see here how figure got collapsed down into 1. So that's good. Back to our code here. We can just console log our code to see and make sure it's working right. Now we can see that we have a nested array with children, and it has all the information that we need and the relationships built in here. And so this is great. This is exactly what we need. Yeah, so we're pretty much almost done here, which is great. So now we can take this tree, and as we set that, I have a little function here that I already wrote, so we didn't have to worry about that. This will render the tree out with our new syntax, or the way we have children nested. And then I can use this here. This should work. Oh, for each does not work. Tree child render. Okay. So the way we can fix this is we just want to take the first element here off of our tree, and that should fix things. Cool. And that's about it. So that gave us a way to statically analyze our code. And yeah, ran into a little bit of an issue. So it seems pretty easy at first when you first just do a JSX element. You're like, oh wow, I can enter or store all this information about all my JSX elements, and then and statically analyze them. But as you go along and you realize, oh, it's a flat structure. How do I get this relationship built up between, having that enter and exit ability really helps there to build that information up. And so this is a very, very simple Babel plugin. I think it hopefully just gives you an intro into Babel plugins and how easy they can be to write. I was kind of mind blown when I first wrote my first Babel plugin. I took a course on it, and which I highly recommend. There's a front-end master's course by Kent C. Dodds that is a wonderful introduction into ASTs and eslint and writing your own eslint plugins and Babel plugins. But just at the end of the day, it's JavaScript. So if you know JavaScript, just kind of peeking around and learning the syntax, and the docs have gotten a lot better for Babel in the recent years. I highly suggest just going to the site and poking around. And looking at the video section especially, there's a lot of wonderful talks about Babel and how you can use it to do some really awesome things. So yeah, thank you so much for coming to my talk, and please let me know if you write your own Babel plugin or if you're inspired by this. You can find me at superserious on Twitter or souporserious.com. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. Sorry about putting us up on the screen a little too soon. You guys get to watch both of us watch Travis.
It's a little weird to watch yourself.
Yeah, it is.
And also that audio,
yeah, I noticed that the audio may have been a little choppy. So while the video was going, I asked Travis if he would mind if we put this up on the Full Stack YouTube channel itself, just the video file, and he said that's fine. So sometime tomorrow I'll upload that. So if you guys want to see that, maybe a little more clearer, and hopefully with the audio not choppy, because my computer's fans are like, I'm about to burn down this building here because my laptop's on fire right now. Did not expect that. Hopefully, yeah, exactly. Get on it. Yeah, it'll be better. All right, so that was really cool. So if you have any questions, put them in chat. I got a couple questions. So in watching that, what are some other ways you can use the AST to, what are some other tools you can make that now that you have this power?
I think the blocks UI that I was talking about. So if you go to blocksui.com, I believe, I'll double check that just to make sure. It has, it's probably like the best use of like Babel's potential outside of its normal use case. So they essentially built a ton of little Babel plugins similar to what we built in this talk. And they run transformations on your JSX, and it turns it into a full-blown design tool, which was like mind-blowing when I first saw that. I was like, wow, like this is a wonderful like use case of Babel. And so that's kind of what got me into this whole world of things. I was like, I started to look at these little Babel plugins, and I'm like, oh my, it's just JavaScript. Like that's it. Like I know JavaScript, I write it every day. So I had that similar kind of thing with Node. When I first learned Node, I was like, I can read the file system with JavaScript. Like this is insane. So yeah, if you know JavaScript, definitely like just start playing around with these tools. It's not that much magic underneath the hood. So
cool. I'm gonna go ahead and share some of the links that you put up there. So you mentioned these at the end of your talk, so I'll just leave up on the screen. I guess you mentioned that there's an array of plugins. So like when you entered your plugin in the list of plugins, does that mean that you can have multiple running one after the other? Like you can pipe output of one into the next and the next? Is that how that works? Yeah,
exactly. So if you've ever set up a Babel config before, so like usually the normal way you would set up Babel is through like your CLI tool or like through your server. And so I guess not your server, it'd probably be on your CLI tool because or I don't know, it'd be on your server, right? Yeah. Sure. And so you'd have like your Babel config. So it's essentially that. So like when you have a Babel RC file and it's got like a JSON array of all your plugins that it's looking for in package JSON, we're essentially doing that, but in a runtime area. So the runtime is really just for like this design tool purpose, right? If you want to do anything with Babel in a runtime environment, it'll be very similar to that. So yeah, you could long answer short.
No, that's good. So essentially what you're doing, correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially what you're doing is between Babel taking your source code and displaying it as JavaScript, you're basically interrupting that process and saying, oh, wait, now that you've done this first step, there's a couple other things I want you to do before you end up with the output JavaScript. Is that what this process is actually doing?
Yeah, essentially. So I'm using that React Live package that I mentioned in the beginning. And so React Live is just taking the string of code. I should have showed this off in the demo. If you go to my site, superserious.com, this is based off an article I wrote about a month ago. And you can actually change that JSX, which is kind of fun because it's a live code editor. And so you can see like the layers panel updating, which is really cool. So it's not, we're just using Babel for the static analysis. We're not using it to actually transform any code.
Okay.
So yeah, that's why there's like that promise in there. So we just use the promise and it resolves only on that callback. So we kind of just throw away like Babel's normal process of like what it usually does.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then I have a kind of a sarcastic leading question, but how dare you look at someone else's site and see what they're doing?
Right?
You must feel very good about yourself. No, so like I know that there's a lot of people watching both live and some of these replays that are kind of just starting out and are trying to learn, trying to get better, and honestly may feel a little silly or ridiculous or like they're stealing something if they look at someone else's web code to see what's going on. But I love the fact that you're like, I was trying to figure out like how'd they do that. So I just looked at the code and I was like, oh, that's how they did it. And so I decided to move it online.
Yeah, so I'd say just because that was an open source project, so it was kind of, I think, up for grabs. Like if there's an open source project, you should definitely look at that code and try to understand it if it's of interest to you. That's kind of how I've like learned my whole career is just kind of poking at projects or contributing to projects. So I actually contributed to this project, which is what got me into learning about how that whole Babel system worked. I saw that there was like a design tool, so my designer said to me, was like, "Ooh, I can like contribute to this. It would be fun." And so I had done a PR and then it was in the code base, and I was like, "Wow, like this is a pretty awesome use case of Babel outside of like its normal use case." So yeah, I would say for beginners or anyone that at any level, just like hop into those open source projects if they're of interest to you or on similar lines of what you're trying to get done. And try to understand, like deconstruct that code. I feel like that's the best way to learn because we all code in different ways and you can learn new tricks. Very powerful.
Definitely. Yep, I agree. Well, what else are you working on these days?
I'm
projects?
Yeah, so this was based on a tool I'm working on called JSX UI. So it's kind of like the Blocks UI tool. So it's going to be a design tool, but also like a component library in a sense. So I'm trying to, I think the designer side of me, I want to try to build that design tool I've always wanted with React. And so like something that outputs to code, but also augments code in a nice way, which React can do since it has like so much information because we're in a JavaScript environment. So you can check that out at jsxui.com. So that's been my like fun little pet project more recently.
Yeah. Yep. Was it jsx.ui or jsx
UI.com?
Okay, cool. I'm going to load it up.
Sweet. It's pretty rough around the edges, but I'm hoping to release like the first package soon. So there's an editor which has this like layers panel integration in it, and it uses Babel to like it runs like a little local Express server to update your file like inline. It's like pretty bare right now with things that I've been chipping away at it slowly.
Yeah, that's right. Coming soon.
Yep. The overrides one's pretty exciting though. I haven't seen anyone. Well, I've seen overrides patterns in React libraries, but I have kind of a different take on it with this overrides thing. So it uses a pragma, which is essentially like it allows you to talk to every single element in your JSX, and allows you to override any elements similar to how you can do with CSS and like your styles. So I'm sure a lot of people will probably hate me for that, for building like a CSS selectors for JSX, but it's pretty fun. It's how I build the editor. And if you hold, I think it's Control or Alt, you can see like the space throughout this whole thing.
Let's see.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, you can just kind of like bounce around. Yeah, so that was like the first part of it. So it's using like this overrides component that can inject, it's kind of like dependency injection for any JSX code you have, which is kind of fun. So this has been just like my little pet project I've been working on. Little by little.
Love it.
Yeah.
And I notice, do you want to plug your Twitter handle here? Because I know that you tweet a lot about this kind of stuff. You're like I mentioned that you're like the mad scientist of designers, in my opinion. So a lot of that's because of me just knowing what you're tweeting all the time. You're like up at 4 a.m. working on some crazy ideas. What's that Twitter account?
So it's twitter.com/soup-or-serious. Is it just me now? I don't know where Gio went.
My browser.
I was like, what happened?
It kept you in?
Yeah, it kept me in. It was just me. I was like, am I still here?
Oh my gosh.
Still here.
Sorry about that. So yeah, super serious. Twitter.
Yep.
I'm assuming that's
Super
what you're
serious.
talking about. I was gone.
Yep.
I'll go back and watch the replay.
Yeah, so superserious.com has like all my links. So it's got my like Twitter and GitHub with like these like JSX UI projects and stuff like that. And I've been trying to write a lot more this last year of just kind of all these ideas that I have. So trying to take a different approach, I think, on things. It's like coming from it from a design perspective. Yeah. So hopefully you can enjoy that content.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Awesome. Well, do you have anything else to share before we head out here? Doesn't look like we have very many questions in the peanut gallery here. So, oh yeah, by the way, if you have a question, now's your last chance to get it in before we head out. But yeah, anything you want to mention in closing? Yeah,
I think just, again, like if whatever level you're at, I think just kind of use the resources that are out there, especially like with the open source projects. I feel like we have a very unique career path that we're all in. And so to be able to share things like that so easily, I think we can benefit a lot from each other by learning and contributing to projects too. If you have the time and bandwidth to do that, definitely can teach you just a ton of new things and tricks and kind of iterating on those. And yeah.
I saw a Twitter thread recently about how this guy has been in the industry like 25 years now. And he feels like a lot of the articles are focused more towards like super beginners. Like this is how you set up your project. And he's bemoaning the fact that he wishes there were people for articles and tutorials and things for people who have been in the industry for 25 years, because he feels like he's kind of stagnated and wants to know how he can grow. As far as your articles go, where do you think in terms of like that spectrum, do you think those lie? If you're a complete beginner, would you feel comfortable, or would you need to know some stuff?
I think you would need to know some stuff. I'd say like probably have some JavaScript skill set or React skill set. So I talk a lot about React just because I love React so much. But I do try to, with all my articles, I try to kind of take it from, I don't know. I think it just depends on, it goes from like beginner to intermediate right now. Okay. So I have like one that I wrote about Flip. It's like an animation, a way to do animations performantly. And so I try to go from like a very beginner standpoint on that because I saw a lot of people writing intermediate articles on it. And so I try to break it down like as dumb as possible. And so I think that's like that designer side of me where I'm like, I need it like like explain it to me like I'm 5. Like let's walk through it together. So, but yeah, I think there's a range.
That's cool. That's cool. Good. Well, I do have a question in the, looks like one question is, Gio, what have you been working on? Hello, Eric Bai. What am I working on? I had a side project going where I was writing a kind of like a notes app, a web-based notes app that I was pretty excited about, and was to the point where I was using it pretty much every day, and had a lot of notes in there, like I had all my RubyConf notes, and it was pretty fun. And we think there's a couple of things in there that are interesting enough to create a brand new notes app, because there's plenty of notes apps, But anyway, so got to the point where I was using it all the time. And then I tried to upgrade to Big Sur right before Christmas, and my whole computer just totally crashed. I couldn't even boot anymore, and the hard drives were locked. I couldn't get anything off the hard drives. So I was on support or on chat with support with Apple for hours and hours and hours and hours, and couldn't get anywhere. And finally had to do this weird workaround to reinstall an old OS to upgrade to the new OS. Anyway, long story short, I lost the whole database of the stuff I was working on, all those notes. So I lost I kind of lost gumption at that point to continue working on it for the time being. So I haven't touched it since my computer crashed, but I still have the source code. I just lost all the notes, but I need to get started back on that. In the meantime, I've been really interested in like the beginnings of computing, I guess, because I'm more interested in I'm really interested in like the down to the ones and zeros, like how things go from me typing source code to it literally being ons and offs inside of a chip somewhere, and how that makes a computer work. And so last year, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Ben Eater, but he's got a series of videos on YouTube that he basically goes through and builds a computer from transistors, like from zero on a breadboard. And that crazy. Was so impressive to me. And so I'm toying. I also like doing hardware stuff. So I've been toying with some external hardware for like MIDI synthesizers and a flight controller for flight sim, an external controller for that with like a screen and rotary knobs and everything. But I'm interested in like the hardware and how things work. And so I've been kind of going through and learning assembly language for the 6502 processor, which was the one for like it was in the Super, and then not the Super Nintendo, but the regular Nintendo is in the Atari and the Commodore and the Apple II. So it was like a very early processor that was hugely influential. Apparently, there's still millions a year are in products, so it's still active to this day. So I thought, I know it had a decently small instruction set and not a whole lot to learn. So, and there's a ton of information out there, like from old 80s books about how to program these old processors. So I've been kind of looking into doing assembly language programming in the 6502. So that's my current obsession. And also, I just want to say, like, the books in the 80s and the late 70s, they were awesome. Like, and they're out there to download. A lot of them are on archive.org, which is really cool. And there's a site that has a whole bunch of things, like, it's called the Apple Documentation Archive. Here, I'm going to put this in the chat. It looks like an old FTP site. It's just got like the HTML like directory listings, but in there are tons and tons of technical manuals and books on how to program assembly and just all sorts of crazy stuff. So even just the fonts of those books just give me the feels, you know. It's just something about the way those things were designed, and they take you from, like, when you had a computer in the early 80s or the late 70s, you had to be kind of a nerd, you know. Like, a lot of these things you had to build yourself, or if you didn't, you would upgrade it and decide, okay, well, like the Apple II, it's like you have 40 characters on a screen, like 40 characters wide. But then you could, if you wanted to, you could buy an upgrade chip, an upgrade card, and get like 80 characters wide. It's like, you know, sweet, now I have double the characters per line.
Oh my gosh.
But then you'd have to like know how to address it, and it has to go in like a specific slot in your computer. So there's things like that you just kind of had to know stuff. And I miss knowing things about the inside of what's going on inside my computer. So I like the fact that the 6502 and all that, you can know that. And so along those lines, I'm also building an emulator for 6502 to process those that assembly language. Anyway, that's the nerd stuff I'm into these days.
That's so awesome. Yeah. At least you have Google now, right? Like back in the 80s, right, there was no, like, how would you call hotline maybe or something? Or
yeah,
what?
I guess.
Like, what do you do?
Well, there's also apparently, like, I was too young to really care about the stuff in the 80s when it was happening, but apparently, like, in the computer stores back then, you know, they'd have checkouts, and on the checkouts there were book stands, and so you could buy these books off of these book stands, and there are some like supposedly classics of the era that you could read that are now, like, the authors are giving them away, which is pretty cool. So because awesome. Now it's like, you know, it's kind of history at this point, you know. I kind of want to know the history, and I want to know, I want to know my roots, the roots of my nerdiness. Those that came before me, because I also believe, I do believe this, that, like, we started the whole full stack online stuff with a video about things that programmers forgot, or developers have forgotten, that everyone in the 80s or 90s knew. I can't remember which decade it was, but basically stuff that developers before us knew just in their gut, but now we've kind of lost, whether that's because of the language tools we use now, or just because the technology, like, I don't know what's going on in my MacBook, it's catching on fire because it's trying to play a video, but who knows, who knows exactly what the ones and zeros are doing in there. But maybe that's why these guys knew. But there's techniques, I'm sure, that they knew, and algorithms that they would use all the time that they just didn't think to write down, that now it's just kind of lost on developers like you and me, that I believe we could probably benefit from. So I guess part of my exploration is trying to find out ways we can better ourselves as developers by going back to the roots of the computer.
Yeah, I think so.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, we see like state charts coming back, like they're making a comeback.
Yeah.
And those are from like the 60s, I believe. And so it's pretty awesome to see some of these like well-tested things that are still used today, just not really big in like the front end programming world, or like product world. So yeah, really exciting to see some of those things come through.
Yeah.
Help us like write more resilient code. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure there's gonna be a talk at some point coming out of the stuff I'm working on right now.
Nice.
But we'll see.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Eric,
that's what I'm working on. Yeah. Maybe I'll show off my emulator. Hopefully it'll be cool. I got some cool ideas for it. But yeah. All right. Anything else?
No, I'm good.
All right. Cool.
Follow me on Twitter. No.
Yeah. I'm Gio Russell on Twitter. He's super serious, which is a hilarious name. So kind of normal wrap up stuff. Again, we are here. We started out having this because we want to be a resource for the local development community here in North County, San Diego. And it's harder to do that with the coronavirus going on, but hopefully this is somewhat helpful to anyone who's watching. And I know that people watch after as well. So more people watch after than during. So if you're watching this after, thank you for tuning in, and feel free to email us even after, 6 months down the line. If you have a question, I'm sure Travis would be happy to help you out. And I would as well, anything you need to ask. And then anything you need to learn from us, or any way we can help you, please let us know. We love, obviously Travis and I both love teaching. We love trying to explain things. He's writing stuff. I've written stuff. We like giving information. So if we can help you out in any way, please let us know. Past that, I've got on the screen there a form that you can fill out. Just let us know what you think of how things are going, and how, what topics you might want to see covered in the future videos or meetups. And we'll go from there. So thank you all for watching and tuning in, and I hope you all have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Yeah.